For some reason, there is a dispute, or outright dismissal among some Christians that Genesis 6 was a literal event and means exactly what it says, which tells the account of angels coming down from heaven and mating with human women, which produced the abominations referred to as giants, who started sticking up the joints, resulting in God having to waterboard the earth. The scoffers always point to a few images, supposedly proven to be photoshopped, but they cannot dispute the several articles in the archives of the New York Times and the Washington Post going back into the early 1800s, when giant skeletons were being discovered left and right all over America, Mexico, Greenland, and numerous other countries. They all disappear into a puff of smoke when they see mainstream news reporting discoveries of skeletons either in whole or in parts that measured up to 9 to 12 feet tall, a few even taller than that. It was even reported that a few of them had bones protruding out of their heads like horns. But then we get to about the early 1970s, and suddenly there's a total media blackout. Suddenly, the giant skeletal remains all just disappeared into a black hole with no explanation given. There has been lots of suspicion concerning groups like the Smithsonian Institute and their involvement in concealing the evidence of these beings, keeping them locked away in vaults. If the archived articles for the mainstream news sites are any indication at all, then it is definitely proof of a massive, systematic cover-up. The question that will then arise is if there is a conspiracy to conceal such evidence, then why have these news sites simply removed the articles from the archives? There is a reason for it, and it has everything to do with what this video is about, which is to determine the motive for a possible unveiling of the skeletal remains at a later date. If this were to happen, they would likely refer to these articles, and the most likely excuse they would give is that they couldn't put them on display because they didn't think their existence was ready to be known. Some people think that doing so will give too much credibility to the Bible, but in reality, when the time is ripe, this will play right into the alien deception. As I stated in my other video titled The Antichrist and the Media's Role in Promoting Him, there is a high chance that the Antichrist might present himself as an ET that evolved into a godlike being, or an ascended master, as a New Ager would say. Prior to his arrival, the skeletal remains of the giants will likely be used as a missing link or hopeful monster to prop up the interventionist theory of evolution. After all, if life evolved here on Earth, then life must have evolved somewhere else. And slowly but surely, we indeed see the scientific establishment throwing the theory of evolution into outer space.
Long time ago, extraterrestrials arrived on this planet. They realized that the planet was full of life, and one of them was the most advanced form, was one of our ancestors. They took the DNA out and they changed the basic information in the DNA. This is what our genetics are doing every day. Now the cell was changed, the product you plant into the womb of a female of the same species. This female will give birth to a child approximately after 9 months. But because of this artificial mutation, and that's different, because it was made artificially by the extraterrestrials.
Understanding this, the top groups that I highly suspect will have an involvement in this is, of course, the Smithsonian Institute, the United Nations, NASA, SETI, which stands for the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and the Vatican. And it's just as likely that the Vatican also have the giant skeletal remains locked away in their secret vaults. Don't forget that the Vatican's Pontifical Academy of Science has been holding conferences since at least 2008 on astrobiology concerning the possibility of alien disclosure.
Look what I made for you!
What a classic scene. 1980 what? 85? 82? Lizzie here on the floor tells us that's the year she was born. We could not talk life on other planets without the classic clip from E.T. right there. Interestingly, the Vatican. Just finishing up, this is the Vatican now, a 5-day conference on aliens. Father Jonathan Morris, Fox News contributor, back with us. Father, good morning to you.
What a great movie that was.
It was a wonderful movie. Drew Barrymore, and off she went. Did the Vatican find alien life?
You know what? As sensationalistic as that question sounds, it's really not that far off from what we've seen in the news over these last days. The pictures of what might have been Pope Benedict standing on the roof of the Sistine Chapel looking for UFOs, that's the type of images that this news conjures up. What is exceptional is that the Vatican was taking very seriously what science might tell us about the possibility of extraterrestrial intelligent life forms. That's what the conference was about. I can't tell you that the Vatican found any alien life. I don't think that's what they were looking for, but they were taking very seriously the issue.
You know the history, just like we do. I mean, they've come a long way since Galileo 400 or 500 years ago. Well, what do you think it says about the church that it's actually looking at this issue?
Well, a great question, Bill. What it says is that although there have been some inglorious moments of relationship of faith and science, the Vatican, and not just Catholics, Christians in general, they brought 30 of the best scientists, the astrobiologists, of the cosmologists, of the astronomers, to tell the philosophers and the theologians what they already know about the possibility of something that could happen. Now, what they're trying to do is get out of the story, get out ahead and say, what if we were to find life outside of this planet? What does that tell us about the doctrine of original sin, of Adam and Eve? And their point here is that we have to allow science to lead us in what is their field, without going into it with ideology saying we know that God doesn't exist.
I think that's a great point. Now, you as a Roman Catholic priest, you're open to science, is what you're saying, correct?
Without a doubt, not only open, Bill, but we have to respect science in its own field.
How would it change the church's teaching then? Well, if you consider for a moment, if you determine that there is extraterrestrial life there?
Well, one thing would be fascinating would be not only extraterrestrial life, but if it were extraterrestrial intelligent life forms. That would definitely make us go back and say, maybe our understanding of perennial truths needs to be updated. Now, the way we look at it is this. It's not about whether or not God was the creator, but rather how he created. It's not a question of whether original sin, this Adam and Eve story, is true or not, but our understanding of how that played out. So it's growing in our understanding of perennial truths.
I think that's an interesting explanation there. And I think also if it were determined, Father, that would be an earthquake, would it not?
It would be, and especially if the Vatican were involved in accepting that. I think we have to make sure that science is not in some way ideologically driven. We have to make sure that faith and religion is not ideologically driven. Faith and reason, they go together.
Well, you represent the church very well in this segment here. Now, I know they've had the conference. When they determine something, if they do, come on back, okay? Father Jonathan Morris.
If I see anything, I'll tell you.
Done.
Thank you.
Now, I've been looking at reviews about the movie Noah starring Russell Crowe. I've never seen this movie myself, nor do I intend to, because what Christians have been saying about this movie does not sit well with me at all, and only confirms my suspicions. This Gnostic piece of horse manure depicts the giant blood-sucking cannibals of Genesis 6 as benevolent angels that were kicked out of heaven and encased in a rock for showing compassion for humanity. and they even end up helping Noah build the ark. So according to Satan's disciples in Hollywood, according to the dirtbags responsible for this movie, the giants were the good guys. This is the type of propaganda we've seen for the last 10-odd years from Hollywood, movies like The Mortal Instruments being the most blatant example, and from TV shows like Ancient Aliens. To add further insult to injury, there is a scene in the movie with Noah retelling the creation account. While he's telling it, you get footage depicting evolution. It starts with the Big Bang, it continues on, depicting biological evolution of common descent from a single-celled organism to humanity in the Garden of Eden.
Let me tell you a story. The first story my father told me and the first story that I told each of you. In the beginning, there was nothing. Nothing but the silence of an infinite darkness. But the breath of the Creator fluttered against the face of the void, whispering, "Let there be light." And light was. And it was good. The first day. And then the formless light began to take on substance and shape. The second day. And our world was born. Our beautiful, fragile home. And a great warming light nurtured its days. And a lesser light ruled the nights. And there was evening and morning. Another day. And the waters of the world gathered together. And in their midst emerged dry land. Another day passed. And the ground put forth the growing things, a thick blanket of green stretching across all creation. And the waters, too, teemed with life. Great creatures of the deep that are no more. Vast multitudes of fish, some of which may still swim beneath these seas. And soon, the sky was streaming with birds. And there was evening, and there was morning, a fifth day. Now the whole world was full of living beings. Everything that creeps, everything that crawls, and every beast that walks upon the ground. And it was good. It was all good. There was light, and air, and water, and soil, all clean and unspoiled. Your plants and fish, and fowl and beast, each after their own kind, all part of the greater whole, all in their place, and all was in balance. It was paradise, the jewel in the Creator's palm. And the Creator made man, and by his side woman, father and mother of us all. He gave them a choice. Follow the temptation of darkness, or hold on to the blessing of light. But they ate from the forbidden fruit. Their innocence was extinguished.
It's worth noting that the opening scene in the movie Prometheus was very similar to the creation accounts in the Noah movie. A movie that depicts the ancient astronauts, or engineers as they call them, as the giants that had a hand in jump-starting life on Earth. You all keep this in mind as time goes along, because this type of propaganda will go a long way towards the world being deceived about who these giants really were. All of this gives a clear motive for how the giants' remains will be presented to the public. This won't be the same as other archaeological hoaxes of the past, like the Piltdown Man that was exposed as such decades later. In order to truly con the scientific community that ETs are real, the bones will have to be the legitimate remains of the giants of Genesis 6. It is worth noting that the first step in the well-known conspiracy called Project Bluebeam involved the breakdown of all archaeological knowledge. Now we know the difference between an ET and an angel. Both are aliens, only an angel is celestial in origin, which means their existence cannot be reduced down to a materialistic explanation. As I said before, the key to this entire deception working is replacing the supernatural with the natural, to keep the Bible out of the picture. The heathens on the Ancient Aliens TV show that twisted scripture to make angels out to be ETs instead of what they truly are understands that different creatures cannot crossbreed with each other, and this is why they propose the idea of artificial insemination. This doesn't apply to angels, since we know they are celestial or supernatural in origin. Since the giants were not entirely human, when the bones' existence are acknowledged, put on display, and analyzed by the scientific establishment, we can expect to start hearing reports that part of the DNA in the bones cannot be compared to any known creature of Earth. which will naturally, in the eyes of the world, lead to an otherworldly explanation for the origins of these creatures. This is where groups like NASA and SETI will come in and present their so-called findings as further confirmation that they are indeed not of this world. The purpose of this hoax is to convince the world that there are ETs out there that were involved in our ancient past. Michael Heiser cannot have done a better job explaining the role that NASA and SETI will play in this deception.
Now, if you read the scholarly literature, scholars tend to divide people who are interested in UFOs into four groups. There's the materialist. Okay, I would describe these people, these are agnostics or atheists. They're kind of the nuts and bolts people. They're interested in it from a technological point of view or a physics point of view. Again, nuts and bolts kind of people. SETI would be an example. Yes, we think ET life is out there, but we really don't like UFOs. Then you have the physicalists. These are the people who see UFOs as real alien craft from other worlds and that have been coming to Earth for millennia, and they're responsible for the world's religions. Now, if you've ever read any of these authors, Sitchin, von Daniken, this is where they're at. They believe it's physically true, physically real. They've been coming here thousands of years, and they're responsible for Jesus and Muhammad and Buddha and, fill in the gap. They're responsible for all this stuff. And again, I think they sort of they really have to stick to the idea of an alien being some being from another planet, as opposed to interdimensional or some of these other ideas, demonic hypothesis. So you have the physicalists. They're really committed to that view. Theosophy is a branch of occult studies, broadly defined. Occult and esoteric mystical traditions and motifs. This view would essentially say UFOs are spiritual entities. Here's where you get into the sort of metaphysical idea of beings coming from other dimensions and that sort of thing, and not using that to process it in biblical terms, but using that to process the idea in mystical, occultic, esoteric terms. UFOs are spiritual entities, spirit guides. It's very shamanistic. Abduction experiences are cast as shamanistic experiences. Even despite the violence, they're a moment of religious conversion, in the sense that, like with shamans, the gods have chosen you, and they're going to afflict you. It's going to be sort of a trial by fire, trial to see your worthiness to get this information, but they're going to give you this information, and you begin to feel special. You begin to feel like a conduit for secret knowledge and that sort of thing. Again, a very mystical approach. This category overlaps a bit with, I say a bit, in some people's minds, with Christian stuff, because of a guy named Emanuel Swedenborg. How many of you have ever heard of Swedenborg? I see hands going up. Swedenborg was a clergyman, and he's probably the oldest modern example of someone, theologian or not, who wrote about, this is in the late 1600s, wrote about contact with extraterrestrials, with alien beings. He actually uses terms like that. Then you have what the literature calls, and this is not my term, but I'm going to use it because I think it's fairly descriptive, even though it's used pejoratively in scholarly literature, which is unfortunate. Christian fundamentalist. UFOs are spiritual phenomena. Yeah, we agree with those theosophists. It's spiritual, all right, but extraterrestrials are demonic manifestations, and they're also the source of that theosophical junk. Okay, and of course this is going to be the dominant view present here at the conference, as you've already learned if you've listened to the speakers already. So you get these four categories. I personally don't feel like I fit exclusively into any of them. I'm certainly not a materialist. I'm certainly not a physicalist. I'm really not a theosophist either. I don't like that because I'm not into the occult, other than to find out what they think. I think there's a missing category here that I would call eclectic, and that is, I think there's more than one way biblically we can look at extraterrestrials. That doesn't mean that they're not demons. It means that's, I think many of them are. But there could be other ways to process it. So the scholars don't have the eclectic category because they like to pigeonhole people. I want to focus, though, on these two. Materialists and theosophists. At first glance, you would think, what in the world do these people have in common? Because the one is the nuts and bolts crowd, not interested in anything religious, and the other one is very mystical. It's my opinion that these are the two groups that I think currently dominate the culture in terms of people who are interested in UFOs. And if you look at them, they dominate the culture. The culture is a combination of materialist and materialist paganized belief systems. They appear like they're at odds, but they're not. If any of you follow sort of current theoretical physics or metaphysics, there's a lot of talk now among the mainstream scientific community in terms of physics, how everything got here, that is very mystical. And that's not actually new. I mean, it's new in terms of how it's filtered down to the popular culture. But for a long time, this whole idea of that the Earth or the universe is a living organism. It's sort of the Gaia hypothesis on steroids, okay? That the universe itself is a living organism. And it came about because it was always there. It produced itself in some mystical, scientists won't use the word mystical, but they'll try to justify it in terms of quantum physics and things like this. You start seeing a blurring of the lines between these two. At the bottom here, I think the two will be united, and really already are, except for the empirical gap, where spirituality is shown to be entirely natural or material. And this is where I think the ET issue is critical. Because if ET displaces, if it can consistently and coherently displace what we think of as the spiritual, if the natural displaces the spiritual, okay, natural beings, they had to evolve somehow. They're beings that can live and die and all that sort of stuff. If that idea, let's say we were to actually get disclosure that there really are extraterrestrials, it's assumed that they would be so superior that they get elevated to deity status. When that begins to happen, when that idea takes hold, and I don't think you need a flying saucer to land on the White House lawn for that to happen. I think it'd be very simple to trigger this. But once that happens, the materialists are satisfied because, well, yeah, they are gods, but they're the product of evolution. They're technological beings. They're dependent on their technology. We can learn from them. Maybe we can be like them someday. We don't need God. We have them. And you can get the physicalists under the umbrella too, and the physicalists will pipe up and say, yeah, they've been here a long time too, and they're responsible for all that religious stuff. And the materialists would say, well, we used to think you were kooky, but you know what? Now that we're looking at an extraterrestrial, or NASA has admitted that there are extraterrestrials, or NASA has admitted the idea that there really are sort of advanced life forms out there. So that's all you need. Because mentally, people will extrapolate for you. The culture's already prepped through mass media, through decades of exposure to this. They're already prepped to hear the magic words, yeah, a couple missions back, we found something that, we thought it was microbial, and it was microbial life. And then we looked a little bit more, we made a few more missions, and sure enough, we're seeing advanced life forms in terms of cellular development, multicellular things, and even things that we would be able to here on Earth to pick up and look at with our hands. And that's all that needs to be said, because the culture is so in-tuned to believe in random, purposeless, Darwinism, and the idea that this is how life gets here, this is how advanced life gets here, that all of these groups can coexist very nicely if the idea, just the idea, is affirmed in the mainstream. That's all you need. Because then the materialist can look over at the physicalist and say, yeah, we used to think we were kooky, but hey, you know, I'm holding an extraterrestrial life form here in my hand, and anything's possible. You know, it makes me want to reconsider, you know, some of those stories. And, you know, boy, an artificial structure here or there, or at least something that's said to be artificial on Mars or the moon or something like that, you know, who knows? That's all people need. That idea alone will displace God, as you know, if you're a Christian, as you think of him. It's very easy to do. And the Theosophists are happy because, yeah, you know, they've been coming here, and you know, they're such higher advanced beings that, you know, they can just manifest themselves. You know, maybe they come in crafts, maybe they don't, you know, that kind of thing. And they gave us Jesus, and Jesus is giving us all this truth because all those other beings, they've been to other worlds and they've seen all this stuff, and they're so spiritually and ethically advanced. Everybody's happy. Everybody's happy.
This will be the kickstart for the ET hoax in a nutshell, giving a more solid foundation that the Antichrist can plausibly present himself on to deceive the world about his true nature. In keeping with the world's materialistic evolutionary explanation of the origin of life, it will be claimed that the giants were super-evolved humanoid beings from a distant planet, who intervened and sped up our evolution from ape to man. This will give credibility to what is called punctuated equilibrium, which simply means evolution in a hurry. A theory that was made up as an excuse for the complete lack of transitional fossils the world should be buried in if evolution was true. Even hardline atheists like Richard Dawkins made it very clear that he would have no problem believing this rubbish.
In the book.
Well, then who did create the heavens and the earth?
Why do you use the word who? You see, you immediately beg the question by using the word who.
Well, then how did it get created?
Well, by a very slow process.
Well, how did it start?
Nobody knows how it started. We know the kind of event that it must have been. We know the sort of event that must have happened for the origin of life.
And what was that?
It was the origin of the first self-replicating molecule.
Right, and how did that happen?
I told you we don't know.
So you have no idea how it started?
No, nor has anybody.
Nor has anyone else. What do you think is the possibility that intelligent design might turn out to be the answer to some issues in genetics or in evolution?
It could come about in the following way. It could be that at some earlier time, somewhere in the universe, a civilization evolved by probably some kind of Darwinian means to a very, very high level of technology and designed a form of life that they seeded onto perhaps this planet. Now, that is a possibility and an intriguing possibility. And I suppose it's possible that you might find evidence for that if you look at the details of biochemistry, molecular biology. You might find a signature of some sort of designer.
Wait a second. Richard Dawkins thought intelligent design might be a legitimate pursuit?
And that designer could well be a higher intelligence from elsewhere in the universe.
Well,
but that higher intelligence would itself have had to have come about by some explicable or ultimately explicable process. It couldn't have just jumped into existence spontaneously. That's the point.
So Professor Dawkins was not against intelligent design, just certain types of designers, such as God.
There is a lot of buzz on the internet about this idea of a triple helix DNA, and there are apparently many symbols illustrating this triple helix as well. At the moment, no such third strand exists, but this is where the giant's remains will come in. I believe this idea is being promoted because there will likely be a push by the world to become like the giants by extracting the DNA from the bones, which will make a third strand or triple DNA helix. The transhumanists and New Agers will go wild over this and claim that this is the gateway towards the singularity, where we become something more than human or godlike. And when the Antichrist is revealed, the world's alien savior, he will be the living proof in the eyes of the world, not only of the Nephilim and of evolution, but of what we can become if we take the mark of the beast. I believe this is what the prophet Daniel was describing in chapter 2, verses 40 through 43, where he states that this New World Order, or Fourth Kingdom as he calls it, shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. As I stated in my previous video, they will claim that the mark will change your genetic code down to the cellular level, completely opening you up to become one with what they call the God particle, which we know will in fact be devils in disguise, who are the disembodied spirits of the dead Nephilim. This is what all this propaganda about the singularity is really all about when it comes down to it. Those who take the mark will be unredeemable and thrown into the lake of fire along with Satan, the false prophet, and the Antichrist, as is made very clear in Revelation. This is Satan's kingdom. If any of you think that the world will be given the truth about who these giants really were, then you are a fool. I'm not convinced that an ET hoax can be pulled off any other way short of the Antichrist presenting himself as one. So when you start hearing reports that they have archaeological evidence that ETs are real, or that they discovered such evidence, sound the alarm.
The world is full of giants. They have always been here, lumbering in the schoolyards, limping through the alleys. We had to learn how to deal with them, how to overcome them. We were small, but fast. Remember? We were like a wind appearing out of nowhere. We knew that being clever was more important than being the biggest kid in the neighborhood. As long as we keep our heads down, as long as we work hard, trust what we feel in our guts, our hearts, then we're ready. We wait until they get sleepy, wait until they get so big they can barely move. Then we walk out of the shadows, quietly walk out of the dark, and strike.